going to talk today about alcohol and the Sustainable Development Goals. And Movendi International has been looking at the Sustainable Development Goals from the time they were adopted in September 2015, or actually even before that, because as we all know, this was a very comprehensive process that lasted like 2 years that has led to this final 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were then adopted in September 2015. And the question is like, okay, what do the Sustainable Development Goals have in common, or what do they have to do with alcohol? So one goal is rather clear, even though it was not given that alcohol would actually be part of the Sustainable Development Goals, but we can find alcohol under the SDG number 3, target 3.5, which says strengthen the prevention and treatment of substance abuse, including narcotic drug abuse and harmful use of alcohol. And also the indicators are very clear. One of them is actually measuring alcohol per capita consumption. But today we are not here to talk about the SDG 3 only. We are going to look beyond, and also the whole series is actually going to look beyond the goal number 3. And that's something what Movendi International also has done. And so what we have done is that we have looked at all goals and actually on all targets that belong to the goals, and looked at the evidence showing any connection like between alcohol and then the targets that are there. And we have then concluded that 14 out of 17 Sustainable Development Goals would not be achieved if we do not do anything about alcohol harm. So when we look at the social goals, those would be, they would be like ending poverty, ending hunger, providing quality education, achieving gender equality, reducing inequalities, sustainable cities and communities, peace. Let me just move this. Peace and justice and strong institutions, and also providing society free from fear and free from violence. So when we look at these goals, then we can see like alcohol really is an impediment for many of them. So when it comes to poverty, for example, then we know that alcohol either pushes people into poverty or keeps them there. And there are in studies that, for example, have a case from Sri Lanka where we could see that 10% of male respondents in the studies are using as much or even more than their income for alcohol. There is lots of evidence about connection, for example, for connection between alcohol and violence, and violence against or violence on women specifically, but also violence in domestic violence in homes. Then if we move to the next category, and that's the environmental ones, there the countries have committed themselves to protect the planet, work on sustainable consumption and production, and also do or take action, urgent action on climate change. And here we really need to again consider how much, for example, water is spent on alcohol production. So when it comes to wine, it's more than 800 liters that are spent, 800 liters of water spent on 1 liter of wine, and around 300 liters of water spent on production of 1 liter of beer. And then we understand also that really the production is really provides burden on farmlands, on the biodiversity, also where alcohol is actually produced, and it's very often produced in environments that have water scarcity. So this is a quote from a CEO of an organization, Surplus People Project in South Africa, that has said that the alcohol industry is exporting our water in the form of wine. And the wine usually goes to European countries where people have access to water. And then when it comes to then the economic group of the SDGs, Then it's, of course, providing the decent work and economic growth, and then also looking at the partnerships between economic operators and governments, for example, and other stakeholders. And there we can also see in the latest OECD report that has come out just a few weeks ago now, is showing that that alcohol harm will contribute or is contributing to 1.6% GDP decrease in the coming 30 years in OECD countries. And because of the loss of productivity because of alcohol, there is a loss in 595 billion USDs. And then what is also important to say when it comes to the partnerships with different economic actors is that the taxation that would actually be a very good source for development and like for financing sustainable development, that is very often undermined by the producers of alcohol products.
So really, why, as a whole, is the UN interested in alcohol control? The first reason is the significant health burden. And that really should be enough. The burden's so huge that you don't need reasons 3, 4, 5, these ones. It's just the burden is enough. It's what we should be doing. We should give every country the chance to strengthen its alcohol control policies and to implement them effectively. But there happens to be other strong rationales for doing so. When you reduce alcohol consumption, there are co-benefits with other sustainable development goals that Kristina just very well outlined in her presentation just now. Alcohol taxes are a really undertapped source of financing for development. The COVID pandemic's given us a real strong incentive to look for new sources of development to close some of these fiscal holes. And excise taxes on alcohol are really an underutilized source of that, as the IMF, the World Bank, and some other international financial institutions have been pointing out in recent months. And then finally, it's important just to make sure that we ensure coherence among health and commercial policies. It's one thing to have plenty of activities and official development assistance projects to support better lives, increased choices among people. And if we're going to do that, we need to not privilege commercial interests over health and well-being. WHO are leading a new initiative with Movendi and the Global Alcohol Policy Alliance, NCD Alliance, with us at UNDP, Vital Strategies, to really choose, what is the sort of blueprint for countries who want to strengthen their alcohol control policies, where to start, how to do it, how do you build the advocacy and build a movement to get these policies up to the recommended levels. We've started with the 5 most cost-effective interventions. These are restrictions on retail availability of alcohol, advancing drink driving countermeasures, facilitating access to screening, brief interventions and treatments, enforcing bans on alcohol advertising, sponsorship, and promotion, and of course the most cost-effective one, raising prices on alcohol by using excise taxes and pricing policies. So this is the initiative that we're getting moving at country level now. And we're taking advantage of a few of these different measures, the safer partnership, trying to help countries implement the WHO global strategy on reducing the harmful use of alcohol, and then placing it in the NCD response as well. I think the NCD response covers probably half of the harm related to alcohol, but in terms of just where to organize ourselves and respond to it and where to place the policy levers in country, it makes some sense to center it on the NCD response in countries. And we chose these 5 interventions because they're cost effective. And we've done some investment cases on NCDs that I'll get to in a second. But if we pull out those 5 interventions in countries, over 15 years, we're looking at a 5.8% return on investments, which is really significant in terms of a public health measure. Even if the return was 0 and there was no economic gains from doing it, we would still recommend the policies because we want to save lives and improve people's health. But when you have the health improvements plus a significant economic return on it. It just makes the rationale for acting now that much higher, because the sooner you start the measures, the sooner the positive returns come in. So some of this work stems back to an initiative that we did a few years ago, and this was, again, it was WHO, UNDP, GAPA, Movendi, where we looked at, the way countries were linking policies on alcohol and their policies on HIV and gender-based violence, because there really was an interesting dynamic between those three issues. And this chart shows really how much stronger the HIV and GBV policies are compared to alcohol. And even though this was probably 4 years ago, I don't think much has changed. And so this is one area we really want to make sure we can give good attention to helping countries strengthen their national alcohol strategies. And we know that in many countries, the countries that do this, the policymaking process is often sort of intercepted by the industry, who have their consultants who go in and draft alcohol strategies for countries and submit them directly. Sometimes they're even adopted, but these are the ones that focus more on voluntary measures and things that are just very soft and focusing on the consumer, focusing on social responsibility, and really ignore the proven cost-effective measures that WHO and others are recommending. Again, just to give this sort of rationale for moving quickly on it, we've done some research looking at the sort of, I guess, the juice that can be squeezed from increased alcohol taxes, and they're really significant. In many countries, it's the highest, the most fruitful place that countries can go to get quick revenues to close some of these COVID-shaped fiscal gaps. And really, the one thing we need to keep in mind as well when looking at these taxes is that they are pro-poor. I mean, any consumption taxes are on their face going to look regressive because the taxes make up a greater share of the income of someone at the lower end of the income spectrum. But the sensitive to the price changes, the demand elasticity is such that we know that the people at the lower end of the income spectrum are going to have their behaviors changed more by price measures. And then therefore the health benefits from the changed consumption patterns are going to accrue disproportionately to those populations. So really this is why these health tax measures are an effective means for achieving SDG 10 on achieving inequalities.
Okay, so a number of you will be very familiar with the ways in which alcohol companies have been positioning themselves as kind of engines of development in recent years, and I may well have kind of stolen these images from a number of colleagues on the call. I think Aadielah will be particularly familiar with the fairly notorious Beers for Africa initiative launched by South African breweries a few years ago, in which SAB partnered with a local Stop Hunger NGO in order to generate funding for student meals via the purchase of alcohol. At an international level, we've had big initiatives like Stella Artois partnering with Water.org, and obviously AB InBev have recast the Sustainable Development Goals as smart drinking goals in fairly high-profile initiatives. Again, we can see this playing out at company level in some very different ways. I wanted to look at Diageo briefly in this context, where they're one of 17 global companies who are including a number of ultra-processed food companies who have positioned themselves as the business avengers to highlight the crucial role businesses have to play in hitting the targets of the SDGs. Now, in addition to demonstrating that the Marvel cinema universe really is scraping the bottom of the barrel, what I think is interesting about this particular framing is the very close linking of promoting positive drinking with goals around championing inclusion and diversity. And I think this is a really powerful lens through which to demonstrate the interaction between engaging with sustainable development and core strategic objectives, particularly around marketing to women, which I'll return to later in the presentation. So if we put this in a governance context, again, goal 17 is I think that in many ways the most important part of the Sustainable Development Goals, because it's the it's the governance underpinning for the SDGs as a whole, though it tends to be pretty neglected. There's a whole host of aspects of this goal which I think are really important from an alcohol perspective, particularly the commitments around trade liberalisation, which I hope will get picked up in future sessions. But I want to focus in particular on the emphasis on partnership, which runs across Goal 17 with commitments to multi-stakeholder partnerships to mobilise and share knowledge, expertise and resources, encouraging and promoting effective public-private and civil society partnerships. If we look at the UN high-level meeting on NCDs, the political declaration that came out of that is just full of commitments to public-private partnerships as preferred modes of achieving health goals, with the notable exception of except for tobacco, of course. And at a broader level, partnerships are being presented as, as not just one way forward, but as the only way forward. And I think there are a number of particularly kind of concerning dimensions about this as they relate to alcohol. So Dr. Tedros at the World Health Assembly a few years ago suggested that we must choose whatever partnerships are open to us in whatever way we can to achieve our goal. We have to believe in partnerships. That's the only way. Now, the emphasis on belief in partnerships in the absence of much evidence of their effectiveness in many contexts is interesting. But I do think that the emphasis on partnerships is also of particular concern in relation to the alcohol industry and to WHO in the current context. This is, of course, really important to alcohol producers who have put a lot of effort into positioning themselves as partners in progress in the SDGs. So alongside the UN high-level meeting a couple of years ago, we had the great and the good, led by David Nabarro, moderating a meeting on behalf of the beer industry on advancing the SDGs, a partner's perspective. Pretty difficult to imagine him doing that for a number of other companies. This is in the context in which I think it's important that we understand that a whole series of philanthropic initiatives by alcohol companies, as with ultra-processed food companies and other unhealthy commodity industries, have very clearly been used in the context of COVID-19 to advance core strategic interests rather than simply to contribute to response efforts. So, in particular, an emphasis on appeals to women and appropriating the language of gender diversity and inclusion in order to reposition companies as alcohol producers as appealing to women, particularly in key emerging markets. This is an example of an initiative launched by the Pernod Ricard India Foundation, so the philanthropic arm of Pernod Ricard in India, where they launched a high-profile Corona Hacks initiative around women entrepreneurs. And it's a nice way of demonstrating what we might term the kind of two faces of alcohol philanthropy. So on the one hand, you've got the kind of the publicly appealing face of appealing to development and women and philanthropic initiatives, but it doesn't take much probing to see how this fits with the bottom line, and to thinking about what aspects of the SDG agenda might we use in promoting more coherent approaches to alcohol health and development. So I think that part of the goal 3 that is important is the idea that that we are committed to strengthening capacity of all countries, in particular developing countries, for management of national and global health risks. And I really don't think it should be beyond us as a scientific and advocacy community to position the alcohol industry convincingly as constituting national and global health risks. And in particular, to kind of leverage the commitment to enhancing policy coherence for sustainable development. There's a whole host of ways in Kristina and Dudley's presentations that clearly demonstrate that the current positioning in relation to the alcohol industry is incoherent and likely to undermine effective health policies. In the context of pressures for partnership, there's been a sustained attempt to develop safeguards against possible conflicts of interest in developing policy and implementing nutrition programs, and it ought to be possible to learn from that experience in developing similar approaches to more carefully managing interactions with the alcohol industry.
There are real challenges that is being experienced in countries of the South around moving our governments to look at alcohol as an impediment to development. I mean, a key issue is that the African continent and Southern Africa is at the moment a bit of a playground for the industry. That more or less 30% of people drink in the region, but of those that drink, almost 70% of them drink at heavy episodic levels. But Africa is also home to young people. 60% of the population is under 25, and it's estimated that by 2050, that would increase with 50%. We've also home to an increase in middle class with disposable income. I mean, I think a key issue is that there's limited regulation, and Dudley showed the chart around the policies that has been adopted in the region. And within our network, only 3 countries thus far has got policies. And so for us, we see big alcohol as another wave of colonization, and that the competition between the big three, but particularly InBev and Heineken, is a real challenge. I think in addition to that is the issue of the industry relationship with government. And we've got a challenge where some of our governments own shares in these companies through their development corporations. Now, that creates a particular problem for when Dudley points out to the issue of coherence of policies between health and commercial interests. And how do our governments struggle to manage these different roles. But we also have our policy makers involved on the boards of the industry. So in Namibia, for instance, the governor of a key region is a board member of the Namibian brewery. And then, of course, there's the issue of partnerships. And I think that's what Jeff's focus around partnerships is the issue of how the industry has successfully been able to convince our governments that they need to partner with the industry to push a particular agenda. So in Namibia, the Namibian breweries has looked at what they call blow the horn on the rhino poaching, which is also appealing to people in the north. And then there is the issue of water usage that Kristina referred to, and their contribution to what they see as cutting their water usage in the production of alcohol. And then, of course, the particular problem around marketing, branding of pubs and taverns. But we know that there's an increasing footprint around social media. And then we've got the problem of brand and ambassadors of popular cultural and sports personalities adding their voice to the industry advertising. And then, of course, sports sponsorship. I think the issue around policy interference and pressure from the industry is probably our major challenge. So we saw in Botswana that resulted in a decrease in the tax and an increase in sales hours. In Lesotho at the moment, they are delaying the conversation around an alcohol tax levy. And in South Africa, they've successfully been able to stall the passing of 3 legislative pieces that would regulate alcohol better. The challenge is that the narrative has been of job creation and a key economic contributor. And this is despite the fact that we know that the South African society spends about 248 billion rand on alcohol harm, whilst only generating about 97 billion in revenue. And then there has been an extensive, almost PR campaign around job loss and economic loss to the industry. Every day in the media, we see how the industry is losing millions. But just in February this year, Distel announced that they had a 14% increase in profit for 2020. So the narrative that they are pushing versus what is the real experience of the industry is different. And then they've disinvested. They've invested. Both Heineken and InBev withdrew significant investment. But this week, SCB has come back and said, okay, we'll reinvest. So there's what I see as a very abusive relationship that the industry has with South Africa. We will do this if you do that. So don't regulate and we will invest. And the stories for the past week has been they envisage that there will be no ban, and therefore they think it's essential to put money in back into some of the operational outfits. They're clearly not wanting to go into the direction of regulating availability, marketing, or pricing. We're trying to intervene as civil society, but that's particularly difficult.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to say because we're still so in the thick of it, but it opens the door for the conversations. It gives us, something to lean on and show the governments have committed to achieving these things. It's easy to get frustrated that the pace of progress isn't faster. But this is why they're long-term goals that they go out now to 2030. And it wasn't too long ago, it was only 2015 that there was no target on reducing consumption of alcohol or anything related to it. The previous development agenda, the Millennium Development Goals, was really much more narrow. So it really is a good step forward for us to have this. And I think it's easy to not attribute, some of the progress that's been made in recent years to this and just think that it's just the natural course of things. But I think the fact that the negotiators thought to include this as a target in the development agenda really is key for us, that it just takes away the excuse of policymakers to say we don't need to deal with this or it's a separate issue. And the fact that it's located in that third SDG on health and well-being really centers the discussion as well.
If you sort of step back a bit and see that transformation from the MDGs to the SDGs is a transformation from very few goals to pretty much everything being covered one way or another, and therefore inclusion is great, but the terms of that inclusion can be a little bit unclear, and the sort of strategic benefits of that inclusion can be contested because so many issues can claim it. But alcohol just has so many things going for it in terms of addressing core strategic needs of government and other actors, and one way and another we haven't leveraged that potential effectively yet. I mean, I think the sustainable financing route is the most obvious illustration of that, but the defining challenge of the SDG agenda is to find ways of promoting coherence and accelerating progress across multiple goals. And there's really very few agendas that have the potential that alcohol does in this space. And I don't think that anyone's done a good enough job of really kind of leveraging that potential yet. Again, I think the comparison with infant formula is really important in a number of ways. Obviously, infant formula was kind of the first issue that really leveraged a big new innovation in global health governance in the infant formula code, and thinking about the role of global civil society in building support for that, and the and the kind of strengths and weaknesses of the infant formula code as thinking about a route for global health regulation in an alcohol space moving forward is really important too. But again, that broader point that practices around the supply of infant formula and around interactions with the infant formula industry are so much more developed than they are around the alcohol industry, and that seems odd in a number of contexts.
I think that our challenge has been is that we have not necessarily used it as a rallying point, and I think that is generally in the civil society sector. What we have, however, discovered is and maybe it's because SAAPA has been new, but in the past year, the issue of GBV and children's rights, in fact, has become more foregrounded as a rallying point. And so we have more organizations joining the alliance because that is the area of interest. So the challenge is really up to us as advocates to look at how we use these different instruments as rallying points to engage people on the issue.
Understanding policy coherence is the defining challenge of the SDGs, and it's really difficult, even in issues that look comparatively complementary, to try and develop approaches that are connected, coordinated, integrated, and which successfully promote, health, economic development agendas is really messy, and it does need a lot of work. But alcohol does have a number of advantages, I think, that as a kind of site for policy innovation in promoting policy coherence, I think. One of the more obvious things that we can do, which characterizes so much of the NCD agenda, is just stop doing things that we know don't work. That would be kind of quite transformative in this space, and so much of the agenda internationally around alcohol and NCDs is geared towards things that we know don't really work. Getting rid of those would be incredibly helpful, and I think thinking about governance mechanisms as a way of doing that is important. So partnership approaches in alcohol and in ultra-processed food are incapable of achieving their core health objectives. They can, demonstrate marginal gains on some issues, but they are incapable of tackling the big drivers of those health problems. So that's a kind of starting point. I think, we need to think about connecting alcohol, and I know this is something that Movendi and colleagues in IAS are very interested in as well, connecting alcohol with the broader commercial determinants of health frameworks and thinking about developing more coordinated approaches across unhealthy commodity industries. But then if we take it down to kind of substantive policy drivers, I think that the big one here is taxation, and that's the real card that alcohol has to play, particularly in a context of increasing financial pressures, increasing pressures on aid, so towards sustainable financing